The bullet had torn through Katherine Foster's side just as the sun began its descent over Ventura, California, painting the dusty streets in shades of crimson that matched the blood seeping through her fingers. She stumbled against the hitching post outside the Golden Rose Inn, her vision blurring as she pressed her palm harder against the wound, trying to stem the flow that had already soaked through her cotton blouse and dripped onto the weathered planks beneath her boots. The year was 1878, and women like her, who dared to testify against corrupt land barons in territorial disputes, learned quickly that justice came with a price written in lead and gunpowder. Katherine had been riding hard for 3 hours since the ambush outside the courthouse in Santa Barbara, where she had just given her testimony about witnessing the unlawful seizure of her late father's ranch by Marcus Thornhill and his hired guns. They had been waiting for her on the coastal road, 3 men with rifles and no mercy, and only her mare's speed and the rocky terrain had saved her from joining her father in the ground. But the bullet that caught her ribs had done its damage, and now she needed help desperately, even if it meant throwing herself on the mercy of strangers in this coastal town she had never visited before. She pushed through the door of the Golden Rose Inn, leaving a smear of red on the polished brass handle. The interior was warm and well-appointed, with oil lamps casting golden light across tables where men played cards and women in silk dresses laughed too loudly. The innkeeper, a portly man with mutton chops and a pristine white apron, looked up from the ledger he was writing in, and his face went from welcoming to horrified to coldly calculating in the span of 3 seconds. "Please," Katherine gasped, nearly falling against the front desk. "I need a room. I can pay. I just need somewhere safe to rest." The innkeeper's eyes traveled from her blood-soaked clothing to her pale face, then to the front windows where anyone on the street could see into his establishment. "Absolutely not," he said firmly, coming around the desk but making no move to help her. "I run a respectable business here. I cannot have someone bleeding all over my carpets, frightening my guests, bringing whatever trouble you have got yourself into right through my front door." "I have money," Katherine insisted, fumbling with the leather pouch at her belt. Her fingers were slick with blood and shaking badly. "Please, I just need somewhere to lie down until I can get to a doctor." "The doctor's office is 3 streets over," the innkeeper said, already moving to open the door for her to leave. "I suggest you go there. You cannot stay here. What would people think? A woman comes in here shot up like an outlaw, and then what? The men who shot you come looking, and there is gunfire in my establishment? My reputation would be ruined. Out, please. I am sorry for your trouble, but I cannot help you." Katherine tried to argue, but the room was spinning now, and she could feel her strength draining away with each heartbeat that pumped more blood through the hole in her side. The innkeeper was actually ushering her back toward the door, one hand hovering near her elbow, but careful not to actually touch her and get blood on his pristine shirt. She could see other patrons watching with varying expressions of pity and discomfort, but no one moved to help. In a town like this, getting involved in someone else's trouble was a quick way to inherit it yourself. The door closed behind her with a decisive click, and Katherine stood swaying on the wooden sidewalk, trying to remember which direction the innkeeper had said the doctor's office was. 3 streets over. She could walk 3 streets. She had to. The alternative was collapsing right here and bleeding to death in the dust while respectable people stepped over her body. She made it 2 steps before her legs gave out. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and Katherine found herself staring up into a face that seemed carved from the same sun-weathered stone as the California mountains. The man who had caught her was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of sage in summer. He wore the practical clothing of someone who worked with horses and cattle, dusty denim and a worn leather vest, and there was a gentleness in how he held her that contrasted sharply with the calluses she could feel on his hands. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the fog of pain clouding her mind. "I have got you. You are not going to fall." "The doctor," Katherine managed to say. "He said 3 streets over." The man looked down at her blood-soaked clothing and shook his head. "You would never make it 3 streets. Doc Henderson is probably halfway through a bottle of whiskey by now anyway. He is not much use after sundown." He shifted his grip, carefully lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. "I have a room upstairs at the boarding house next door. Let me get you there and see how bad this is." Through her haze of pain, Katherine felt a flutter of alarm. She did not know this man. and going to his room alone was the kind of thing that ruined a woman's reputation beyond repair, assuming she survived the night. But when she tried to protest, all that came out was a weak sound that might have been a word, or might have been simply the last of her strength escaping. "I am not going to hurt you," the man said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "My name is Connor Reeves, and I give you my word I mean only to help. But if you have got a bullet in you, it needs to come out, and I can do that. I have done it before. You can trust me, or you can take your chances with the street. Your choice, miss, but you need to make it quick." Katherine looked into his eyes and saw no deception there, only concern and a steady determination. She had been reading people her whole life, learning to spot the liars and the cheats who tried to take advantage of her father's illness and then his death. This man, this Connor Reeves, had an honesty about him that she instinctively believed. Besides, she was out of options. "Please," she whispered, "help me." Connor carried her down the sidewalk and around the corner to a 2-story wooden building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Murphy's Boarding House." He managed to get the door open without putting her down and carried her up a narrow staircase to the 2nd floor. The boarding house was quieter than the inn had been, with only the sound of someone playing a harmonica somewhere below and the creak of old wood under their feet. His room was small but clean, with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a wooden chair, and a trunk that presumably held his belongings. Connor kicked the door shut behind them and carried Katherine to the bed, laying her down as carefully as if she were made of spun glass. "I need to see the wound," he said, already moving to light the oil lamp on the small table beside the bed. "I am going to have to cut away some of your blouse. I will try to preserve your modesty as much as I can, but stopping the bleeding comes first. Do you understand?" Katherine nodded, too weak now to feel much embarrassment. She had always been practical, and dying for the sake of propriety seemed like a fool's choice. Connor used a knife from his belt to carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric, working with steady hands and a focused expression. When he peeled back the ruined cloth, Katherine heard him let out a slow breath. "Went clean through," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Looks like it missed anything vital, but you have lost a lot of blood. I need to clean this and bind it tight. It is going to hurt. Do you want something to bite down on?" "Just do it," Katherine said through gritted teeth. Connor worked with surprising skill for a cowboy. He poured water from a pitcher into the basin, then produced a bottle of whiskey from his trunk and added a generous amount to the water. "Learned field medicine during the war," he explained, catching her questioning look. "Served as a stretcher bearer for a while when we were short on men. Picked up a few things. This is going to sting considerably." He was not exaggerating. When he pressed the whiskey-soaked cloth to the wound, Katherine bit back a scream, her whole body going rigid with pain. Connor kept one hand firmly on her shoulder, holding her steady while he cleaned the entrance and exit wounds with methodical thoroughness. "You are doing fine," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Worst part is almost over. Just need to bind it now." He tore strips from what looked like a clean shirt and wrapped them around her torso, pulling them tight enough to put pressure on the wounds without cutting off her breathing. His hands were gentle but impersonal, professional, in a way that helped Katherine relax slightly. This was a man who had done this before, who knew what he was doing, and who seemed genuinely focused on helping her rather than taking advantage of her vulnerability. When he finished, he pulled a blanket up over her, covering her torn clothing and the bandages both. "There," he said, satisfaction in his voice. "That should hold for now. You need rest and liquids. I will get you some water." "Why are you helping me?" Katherine asked as he moved to refill the basin with clean water. "You do not know me. You do not know what kind of trouble I might have brought to your door." Connor paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "My sister was killed 3 years ago," he said quietly. "She was trying to get help after our ranch was attacked by Comancheros. Made it to a town not too different from this one, and every door she knocked on got closed in her face. People were too scared, too worried about their own safety. She bled to death in an alley behind the general store. They found her the next morning." He turned to look at Katherine, and there was old pain in his eyes, but also a fierce determination. "I swore that day that I would never be the person who closed the door, never be the one who chose safety over decency. So, when I saw that innkeeper turn you away, I knew I had to help. It is that simple." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from pain or emotion she could not say. I am sorry about your sister." "So am I," Connor said. He brought her a cup of water and helped her sit up enough to drink. "Now, once you have had some water, you are going to tell me who shot you and whether they are likely to come looking for you here. Because if trouble is coming, I would rather be prepared for it." The water was cool and sweet, and Katherine drank it gratefully before telling him the whole story. She told him about her father, Samuel Foster, who had owned a small but prosperous ranch outside Santa Barbara. How he had died 6 months ago of pneumonia, leaving the ranch to Katherine, his only child. How Marcus Thornhill, a land baron with political connections and no scruples, had immediately begun pressuring her to sell, making increasingly aggressive offers that were really thinly veiled threats. "He wants the water rights," Katherine explained, her voice growing stronger as the water and the relative safety of Connor's room began to revive her. "My father's land controls access to a spring that feeds into Thornhill's property. Without that water, his cattle operation would be severely limited. He tried to buy me out legally at first, offering about a quarter of what the land was worth. When I refused, his men started causing problems. Fences cut, cattle scattered, a barn fire that I am certain was not an accident." "And you testified against him?" Connor asked, settling into the wooden chair and leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, listening intently. "A neighbor's son saw some of Thornhill's men cutting my fences and driving off a portion of my herd. He agreed to testify in court about what he had seen. I testified, too, about the threats Thornhill made directly to me. The judge was actually listening, actually taking notes. I think we might have had a chance at getting an injunction against him, maybe even getting some of my cattle back." She closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. "That is why they shot me. To make sure I could not finish my testimony, and to send a message to anyone else who might think about standing up to Thornhill." "Did you see who shot you?" Connor asked. 3 men. I recognized one of them. His name is Jake Morrissey. He has been working for Thornhill for about 2 years. The other 2 I had never seen before, but they were professionals. The way they set up the ambush, the way they tracked me even when I went off the main road. These were not just ranch hands with guns. These were men who kill for a living. Connor was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. "Thornhill is going to assume you are dead or dying, somewhere between here and Santa Barbara. But if his men did not find your body, they will be looking. Ventura is the closest town on the coastal road. They might come here asking questions." "I am sorry," Katherine said, fresh tears threatening to fall. "I have put you in danger just by being here. Maybe I should try to move on, get further away." "You are not going anywhere," Connor said firmly. "Not in your condition. You would be dead within a mile, and besides, running is not always the answer. Sometimes you have to stand and face trouble head on." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "I have been working at a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Been saving my money, planning to buy a piece of land and start my own operation. I know how hard it is to hold on to something when powerful men want to take it from you. So here is what we are going to do. You are going to stay here and rest and heal. I am going to keep my ears open for any sign of Thornhill's men. And when you are strong enough, we are going to figure out how to make sure you keep your ranch and your testimony stands." "You do not have to do this," Katherine protested weakly. "You have already done more than anyone could ask." Connor turned from the window and gave her a small smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a warmth that had been hidden beneath his concern. "Maybe I want to. Maybe I am tired of seeing bullies win because good people are too scared to stand against them. Or maybe I just have a weakness for brave women who get themselves shot defending what is theirs. Either way, you are stuck with my help, whether you want it or not." Despite everything, Katherine found herself smiling back. "I am Katherine Foster. I realize I never actually introduced myself properly. Pleased to meet you, Katherine Foster, under less than ideal circumstances." Connor moved back to the chair and sat down again. "You should try to sleep if you can. Your body needs rest to heal. I will be right here. If you need anything, just call out." "You do not have to stay," Katherine said, though secretly she was relieved that he planned to. The thought of being alone in her current condition, in a strange town where killers might be looking for her, was terrifying. "I am staying," Connor said with finality. "You are in my room, in my care. That makes you my responsibility. Besides, that is my only bed, so unless you are offering to share, I am sleeping in this chair regardless." Katherine felt her cheeks flush at the thought of sharing a bed with this man, even innocently. "The chair it is, then," she said, trying for a light tone despite her exhaustion. She closed her eyes, intending to rest just for a moment, but her body had other ideas. Within seconds, she was falling into a deep, dreamless sleep, born of blood loss and exhaustion, and the strange sense of safety she felt in the presence of Connor Reeves, a man she had known for less than an hour, but who had already proven himself more trustworthy than people she had known her whole life. Connor watched her sleep, noting the way pain occasionally flickered across her face even in unconsciousness, the way her breathing was shallow but steady. She was beautiful, he realized, even pale and injured. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell in waves around a face that was delicate but strong-featured. There was determination in the set of her jaw, even in sleep, and her hands, though small, showed the calluses of someone who worked hard and did not shy away from difficult tasks. He had not been entirely honest with her about his reasons for helping. Yes, his sister's death had shaped him, had made him unable to walk away from someone in need. But there was something else, something about Katherine Foster that had struck him the moment he caught her falling. A recognition, perhaps, or a connection he did not fully understand. He had looked into her eyes and seen a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss and determination and the lonely burden of standing up for what was right, even when the whole world seemed arrayed against you. Connor had been drifting for 3 years, ever since his sister's death and the destruction of his family's ranch. He had worked a dozen different jobs in a dozen different towns, always moving, never settling, carrying his grief and anger like stones in his pockets. But something about this situation, about Katherine's courage and vulnerability, made him want to stay, made him want to fight, made him want to be the man his sister had always believed he could be, before the world proved so cruel and unforgiving. He settled back in the chair, knowing he was in for an uncomfortable night, but not caring. Outside the window, Ventura's streets grew quiet as businesses closed and respectable folks headed home. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The harmonies player downstairs had moved on to a melancholy tune that drifted up through the floorboards. And in the small circle of lamplight in his rented room, Connor Reeves kept watch over a wounded woman he had only just met, and wondered what strange twist of fate had brought them together on this particular evening, in this particular place. Katherine woke several times during the night, disoriented and in pain. Each time, Connor was there instantly, helping her drink water, checking her bandages, speaking in low, soothing tones until she drifted back to sleep. By the time dawn light began seeping through the thin curtains, Katherine's fever had broken and her color looked better, though she was still very weak. "How are you feeling?" Connor asked when she opened her eyes to full morning light. "Like I got shot," Katherine said, managing a weak smile. "But better than last night. Thank you for staying with me." "Nowhere else I needed to be," Connor said. He stood and stretched, his back audibly cracking from the night in the chair. "I am going to go get us some breakfast and check around town. See if anyone has been asking about a wounded woman. You think you can manage some food?" Katherine's stomach growled audibly in response, and they both laughed. "I will take that as a yes," Connor said. "Lock the door behind me and do not open it for anyone but me. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. That is how you will know it is me, understand?" 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, Katherine repeated. "I understand." Connor left, and Katherine heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway. She forced herself to sit up, gasping at the sharp pain in her side, but determined to assess her own condition. The bandages were clean, no fresh bleeding, and when she gingerly probed the area around the wound, it was tender but not hot. Connor had done excellent work. She would heal, given time and rest. The room looked different in daylight. She could see the few personal possessions Connor owned, arranged neatly on and around the trunk. A spare set of clothes, carefully folded. A battered copy of a book, poetry by Walt Whitman. A photograph in a simple frame, showing a young woman with Connor's same serious eyes and a genuine smile. His sister, Katherine realized, and felt a pang of sorrow for the loss that had shaped him. She was studying the photograph when she heard the knock. 3 raps, a pause, then 2 more. Katherine called out, "Come in!" and Connor entered carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle that smelled heavenly. "Fresh bread, cheese, and some apples from the market," he announced. "Also, coffee, though I had to borrow a second cup from Mrs. Murphy downstairs. She was very curious about why I suddenly needed 2 cups and extra food. I told her my cousin arrived unexpectedly last night and would be staying with me for a few days." "Your cousin?" Katherine raised an eyebrow. "It was the most respectable explanation I could think of on short notice," Connor said, unwrapping the food and setting it out on the small table. "Mrs. Murphy is a notorious gossip. By noon, everyone in Ventura will know that Connor Reeves has a cousin visiting, which should help explain your presence and keep anyone from getting too curious." Katherine accepted the coffee and a piece of bread with cheese gratefully. She was ravenous, and the simple food tasted better than any fancy meal she had ever eaten. "Did you hear anything about men asking questions?" Connor's expression grew more serious. "Actually, yes. I stopped by the general store, and the owner mentioned that 3 men came through yesterday evening, just after sundown. They were asking if anyone had seen a woman riding alone, possibly injured. They described you pretty accurately. The store owner told them he had not seen anyone matching that description, which was true at the time they asked." "They are here," Katherine said, her appetite suddenly vanishing. "In Ventura." "They stayed at the Golden Rose Inn," Connor continued. "Ironic, considering that is where you first tried to get help. But they left early this morning, heading south toward Santa Barbara. The general store owner heard them saying they were going to check the coastal caves and the old mission ruins, places where someone might hide if they were injured." Katherine felt relief wash through her. "So they think I went south instead of stopping in town." "For now," Connor agreed. "But they will be back. When they do not find you where they expect, they will realize you might have gotten help in Ventura after all. We probably have a few days, maybe a week if we are lucky." "I need to finish my testimony," Katherine said, determination strengthening her voice despite her weakened condition. "I need to get back to Santa Barbara and make sure the judge hears everything. If I disappear, if I die, Thornhill wins. He gets away with everything he has done, and he keeps doing it to other people who do not have the strength to fight back." Connor looked at her with something like admiration. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly stubborn." "Can I not be both?" Katherine asked with a slight smile. "I suppose you can," Connor said. He sat down in the chair and looked at her seriously. "Here is the problem. You are in no condition to ride for at least a week, maybe 2. And even when you are healed enough to travel, going back to Santa Barbara is walking straight into danger. Thornhill will have men watching the courthouse, watching your ranch, watching every place he thinks you might go. You show up to finish your testimony, and you will be dead before you reach the judge's chambers." "So, what do you suggest?" Katherine asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "I suggest we think this through very carefully," Connor said. "Your testimony is important, but staying alive is more important. Maybe there is another way to get justice against Thornhill, a way that does not involve you putting yourself directly in his crosshairs again." Katherine shook her head. "There is no other way. The trial is in session now. If I do not show up in the next few days, the judge will assume I'm not coming back. He will dismiss the case for lack of evidence. And without that legal pressure, Thornhill will have free rein to come after my ranch with everything he has got. I will lose everything my father built, everything he wanted me to have." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. Finally, Connor spoke. "Then we need a plan. A real plan, not just charging back into danger and hoping for the best. We need to get word to the judge about what happened, about the ambush and the attempt on your life. That should be enough to delay the proceedings and maybe get the law involved in investigating Thornhill. Meanwhile, we keep you safe and let you heal. When the time comes to go back, we go back smart, not desperate." "How do we get word to the judge?" Katherine asked. "I do not exactly have a lot of trusted friends I can send as messengers. Most of the people in Santa Barbara either work for Thornhill or are too afraid of him to get involved." Connor thought for a moment. "The ranch I work for, the owner is a good man, fair, honest, with connections throughout the county. His name is Thomas Westbrook. He deals with the courts regularly because of cattle sales and land issues. He would know how to get a message to the judge discreetly, and he has the kind of reputation that would lend credibility to your story. I could ride out there this afternoon, explain the situation, and ask for his help." "You have already done so much," Katherine protested. I cannot ask you to risk your job. You're standing with your employer. You are not asking, I am offering, Connor said firmly. And I do not think it is much of a risk. Like I said, Thomas Westbrook is a good man. He has no love for bullies and land grabbers. I think he will want to help once he knows what you are facing. Katherine looked at him, this stranger who had become her unlikely protector, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Gratitude certainly, but also something more, something that felt like the beginning of trust, and perhaps, though it seemed absurd given the circumstances, the first stirrings of something deeper. Thank you, she said quietly. I do not know how I will ever repay you for this. You do not need to repay me, Connor said. Just get well and stay safe. That is payment enough. He stood and moved toward the door. I will be back before dark. Remember, 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. Do not open this door for anyone else, no matter what they say or what excuses they make. And if anything feels wrong, if you hear anything suspicious, there is a gun in the top drawer of that dresser. Do you know how to use a firearm? I was raised on a ranch, Katherine said, with a slight smile. I have been shooting since I was 8 years old. Good, Connor said. Then I will leave you well armed and well fed. Try to rest. Your body is healing, but it needs time and sleep to do its work properly. After he left, Katherine did try to rest, but her mind would not settle. She kept thinking about everything that had happened, about the ambush and the innkeeper's rejection and Connor's unexpected kindness. She thought about her father's ranch, sitting empty now, probably being slowly stripped of anything valuable by Thornhill's men. She thought about the life she had been building before all this, the careful plans she had made for breeding better cattle, improving the property, maybe eventually expanding into horses. But more than anything, she found herself thinking about Connor Reeves, about the gentleness in his calloused hands when he tended her wound, about the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his sister, about the quiet determination in his voice when he promised to help her. She barely knew him, and yet she felt safer with him than she had felt in months, maybe years. There was something solid about him, something unshakable, like he was a man who had found his principles in fire and hardship, and would not be swayed from them, no matter what pressures were brought to bear. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, the light in the room had changed. The sun was lower in the sky, and someone was knocking at the door. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. "Come in," she called out, struggling to sit up. Connor entered, and Katherine could tell immediately from his expression that something had happened. He looked excited, energized in a way he had not been that morning. "Thomas Westbrook is a better man than I even knew," Connor said without preamble. "I rode out to the ranch and explained the whole situation. Not only is he willing to help, he has already sent one of his most trusted men to Santa Barbara with a letter explaining what happened to you and asking the judge to delay the proceedings. He also sent a message to the county sheriff, who apparently has been looking for evidence against Thornhill for years, but has never been able to make anything stick." "That is wonderful," Katherine said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you for doing that." "There is more," Connor continued, pulling the chair closer to the bed and sitting down. "Thomas wants to meet you. He says if you are well enough to travel a short distance, you could stay at his ranch while you recover. It would be safer than staying here in town, where Thornhill's men might eventually find you. The Westbrook Ranch is well guarded and far enough from the main roads that no one would think to look for you there." Katherine considered this. The idea of leaving Connor's small room was both appealing and frightening. Appealing because she hated being cooped up, hated feeling weak and dependent. Frightening because it meant leaving the small bubble of safety they had created here, venturing out into a world where men were actively trying to kill her. "How far is the ranch?" she asked. "About 10 miles north. It would be a slow ride in your condition, but manageable if we took it easy and you rode with me so I could keep you steady in the saddle. We could go tomorrow if you feel up to it, or wait another day if you need more time to heal." "Let me try walking," Katherine said. "If I can walk without tearing the wound open, I can probably manage a horse ride." Connor looked skeptical, but nodded. He helped her stand, keeping one arm around her waist for support. The first few steps were agonizing, and Katherine had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. But after a moment, her body adjusted to the movement, and while it hurt, it was bearable. "I can do it," she said, breathing hard. "Maybe not tomorrow, but the day after. I can ride to the ranch." "You are stubborn," Connor observed, helping her back to the bed. "You say that like it is a bad thing," Katherine replied, managing a smile despite the pain. "It is not," Connor said, and there was warmth in his voice that had not been there before. "In fact, I am beginning to think it might be one of your better qualities." They spent the rest of that day and the next talking, sharing stories of their lives in the quiet intimacy of the small room. Katherine told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father who had taught her everything he knew about cattle and land and the hard work of building something that lasted. Connor told her about his childhood in Texas, about the ranch his family had owned before the Comanchero attack, about his sister Mary, who had been bright and funny and full of dreams that never got the chance to become reality. With each story shared, the bond between them grew stronger. Katherine found herself watching the way Connor's face changed when he talked about things he loved, the way his hands moved to illustrate a point, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire presence. She noticed small things, like how he always made sure she had water within reach, how he adjusted the lamp so the light would not shine in her eyes, how he never made her feel ashamed or uncomfortable about her dependence on him during her recovery. For his part, Connor was discovering that Katherine Foster was unlike any woman he had ever known. She was educated, well-spoken, with opinions on everything from cattle breeding to political corruption to the future of California as the country continued to expand westward. But she was not just book smart. She had practical knowledge earned through hard work and experience. She could discuss the best grazing rotations for different seasons, identify plants that were poisonous to livestock, and explain the intricacies of water rights law with equal facility. More than that, she was brave in a way that awed him. Despite having been shot, despite facing the loss of everything she owned, despite knowing that powerful men wanted her dead, she never once suggested giving up. She never considered simply selling the ranch to Thornhill and walking away. Her father had entrusted her with his legacy, and she would die before she betrayed that trust. Connor had met plenty of brave men in his life, but Katherine's courage was of a different order entirely. On the morning of the third day after the shooting, Connor helped Katherine dress in clothes that Mrs. Murphy had reluctantly provided after he spun a story about his cousin's luggage being lost. The clothes were plain but serviceable, and more importantly, they were clean and whole, not torn and blood-stained like Katherine's original outfit. Moving carefully, they made their way down to the boarding house's small stable, where Connor had his horse already saddled. The horse was a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and he stood patiently while Connor helped Katherine mount. She bit back a gasp of pain as she settled into the saddle, but once she was positioned, she felt better than she had expected. Connor mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist to keep her steady and take some of the pressure off her wounded side. "Ready?" he asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "Ready," Katherine confirmed, though her heart was pounding. They rode out of Ventura slowly, taking the northern road that led along the coast before turning inland toward the Westbrook Ranch. The morning was beautiful, with a cool breeze coming off the Pacific and seabirds wheeling overhead. Katherine leaned back slightly against Connor's solid presence, letting him take her weight, and tried to focus on the beauty around them rather than the throbbing pain in her side. They had been riding for about an hour when Katherine noticed Connor had gone tense behind her. "What is wrong?" she asked quietly. "Riders coming up behind us," Connor said, his voice carefully neutral. "Could be nothing, could be something. Just stay calm." Katherine's heart began to race. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw 3 men on horseback about a quarter-mile back, riding at a speed that would bring them alongside Connor and Katherine within minutes. Even from this distance, something about the lead rider looked familiar. "Connor," she said urgently. "The one in front. I think that is Jake Morrissey, one of the men who ambushed me." Connor cursed quietly. "Hold on," he said, and urged Copper into a faster pace. But the horse was already tired from carrying double, and Katherine's injury meant they could not risk a full gallop. The 3 riders behind them were closing the distance rapidly. "Stop right there," a voice called out. "We just want to talk." Connor pulled Copper to a halt and turned the horse so they were facing the approaching riders. His right hand rested casually on the revolver at his hip, and Katherine could feel the coiled tension in his body, ready to react at the first sign of violence. The 3 men pulled up about 10 feet away. The one in front was indeed Jake Morrissey, a lean man with cold eyes and a scar across his left cheek. The other 2 looked like hired muscle, all broad shoulders and hard expressions. Connor Reeves, Morrissey said, and Katherine felt Connor stiffen in surprise. I know who you are. You work for Thomas Westbrook. Good reputation around these parts, so I am hoping we can settle this without any unpleasantness. What do you want, Morrissey? Connor asked, his voice flat. You know my name. Good. Saves time. Morrissey leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes fixed on Katherine. You have got something that belongs to my employer, or, more accurately, you have got someone who has caused my employer a great deal of trouble. We are willing to pay you to hand her over, $500 cash. You can ride away rich and forget this ever happened. She is not for sale, Connor said flatly. Morrissey sighed. I was afraid you would say that. Look, Reeves, you seem like a decent fellow. Do not throw your life away for someone you barely know. This woman has made powerful enemies. Standing with her is not heroic. It is stupid. Take the money, hand her over, and live to see tomorrow. The answer is no, Connor said. Now step aside, or there is going to be trouble. One of the other men, a burly fellow with a thick beard, laughed. There are 3 of us and 1 of you, Cowboy. How do you figure you make trouble for us? Connor's hand moved in a blur, and suddenly his revolver was pointed directly at Morrissey's chest. Because I am the one with his gun already drawn, and I am the one who will put a bullet through your boss here before either of you clears leather. So, the way I figure it, even if you 2 manage to shoot me, Morrissey still dies. Does your employer pay you enough to die for him? The 2 hired guns looked at each other uncertainly. Morrissey's face had gone pale, but he kept his voice steady. You are making a big mistake, Reeves. Would not be my first one, Connor said. Now, you are going to turn those horses around and ride back the way you came. And you are going to tell Marcus Thornhill that Katherine Foster is under my protection, and anyone who wants to hurt her is going to have to go through me first. You understand? For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Morrissey slowly nodded. I understand. But you should understand something too. Thornhill does not give up. He will send more men. He will keep sending them until this problem is solved. You have just painted a target on your back, Reeves. I will take my chances, Connor said. Now ride. Morrissey and his men turned their horses and rode back toward Ventura, though they kept looking back over their shoulders. Connor kept his gun drawn until they were out of sight, then finally holstered it and let out a long breath. That was either very brave or very foolish, Katherine said, her voice shaking slightly. Probably both, Connor admitted. He turned Copper back toward the north and urged the horse into motion again. But we are not dead, and they know now that you are not unprotected. That might make them think twice. Or it might just make them bring more men next time, Katherine said quietly. Maybe, Connor agreed. But we are almost to the Westbrook Ranch now. Once we are there, you will be safer. Thomas has a dozen ranch hands, all good men who can handle themselves in a fight. Thornhill's hired guns are not going to be eager to take on those odds. They rode the remaining few miles in tense silence, both of them constantly watching for any sign of pursuit. But no one followed them, and by early afternoon, they were riding through the gates of the Westbrook Ranch. The property was impressive, sprawling across several hundred acres of coastal hills, with a large 2-story house at its center. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and Katherine could see several outbuildings, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a smithy. Ranch hands moved about their work, and several of them waved in greeting as Connor rode up to the main house. Thomas Westbrook was waiting on the front porch, and he came down the steps as Connor dismounted and then carefully helped Katherine down. Westbrook was a man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. But his eyes were kind, and his voice was warm when he spoke. Miss Foster, I presume. Welcome to my ranch. I am sorry to hear of the troubles you have been facing. Thank you for offering me refuge, Mr. Westbrook, Katherine said, trying to stand straight despite the pain and exhaustion. I am deeply grateful for your help. Think nothing of it, Westbrook said. Any enemy of Marcus Thornhill is a friend of mine. That man is a plague on this county, and it is past time someone stood up to him properly. Now, let us get you inside. My wife has prepared a room for you, and we have a doctor here who can examine your wound and make sure it is healing properly. Connor helped Katherine up the steps and into the house, where a plump, motherly woman with gray-streaked brown hair greeted them. This was Sarah Westbrook, Thomas's wife, and she fussed over Katherine like a mother hen, ushering her upstairs to a bright, airy bedroom, and helping her lie down on a real bed with a real mattress for the first time in days. The doctor, a young man named Peter Quinn, examined Catherine's wound with professional thoroughness. "Whoever dressed this initially did excellent work," he pronounced. "It is healing cleanly, no signs of infection. You were very lucky, Miss Foster. A few inches to the right and you would not be here at all." "I had a skilled caretaker," Katherine said, her eyes finding Connor, who stood near the doorway, looking slightly uncomfortable with all the attention. Dr. Quinn changed her bandages and left her with instructions to rest and drink plenty of fluids. Sarah Westbrook brought her soup and bread and promised to check on her regularly. And then, finally, Katherine found herself alone with Connor in the quiet bedroom, late afternoon light streaming through lace curtains. "You should rest," Connor said. "You have had a hard journey." "Will you stay?" Katherine asked, then felt her cheeks flush. "I mean, will you be staying at the ranch, or do you need to get back to your work?" "I talked to Thomas. He is giving me some time to help keep you safe. He agrees that Thornhill is likely to come after you again, and he wants me to coordinate with his men to make sure the ranch is secure." Connor moved closer to the bed, looking down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "So yes, I will be staying, for as long as you need me." "Connor," Katherine said quietly, "why are you doing all this? And please, do not just say it is because of your sister. I think there is more to it than that." Connor was silent for a long moment, and Katherine thought perhaps she had overstepped, pushed too hard. But then he sat down in the chair beside the bed, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. 3 years ago, when Mary died, something broke inside me. I spent so long being angry, being bitter, drifting from place to place because I could not stand to put down roots anywhere. I thought, if I never cared about anything, if I never let myself get attached to any person or place, then I could never be hurt like that again. He looked up and met her eyes. "But then I caught you when you fell, and I looked at you, and I saw someone who had every reason to give up, but who chose to fight instead. I saw courage and determination and a kind of fierce spirit that I thought the world had beaten out of people, and I realized that I had been living half a life, protecting myself from pain, but also cutting myself off from everything that makes life worth living." Catherine's heart was pounding. "Connor, I am not saying this to make you uncomfortable," he continued. "I know the timing is terrible, and I know you have got more than enough to deal with without me adding to your burdens. But you asked for honesty. And the honest truth is that helping you, being near you, fighting for something that matters again, it has made me feel alive for the first time in 3 years. So that is why I am doing this, not just for my sister's memory, though that is part of it, but also for you, and maybe a little bit for myself, too." Katherine reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses and the strength in his fingers. "You are not a burden, Connor. You are the reason I am still alive. You are the reason I have any hope at all of keeping my father's ranch and seeing justice done. And if I am being equally honest, these past few days with you have been, despite everything, some of the most meaningful of my life." Connor squeezed her hand gently, and they sat there in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower in the sky and the room filled with golden light. Neither of them spoke of love, not yet, but both of them felt the connection growing between them. A bond forged in crisis, but rooted in something deeper and more lasting. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine's wound healed steadily. She regained her strength gradually, first managing to walk around the bedroom, then venturing downstairs for meals, and finally taking short walks around the ranch grounds with Connor always at her side. The Westbrooks treated her like family, and Katherine found herself growing genuinely fond of them both. Sarah was a wonderful cook, and an endless source of stories about ranch life, while Thomas was proving to be a valuable ally in her fight against Thornhill. The message Thomas had sent to the judge had been received, and word came back that the trial had been postponed for 3 weeks to allow Katherine time to recover from her injuries and return safely to give her full testimony. Moreover, the county sheriff was now officially investigating the ambush, and warrants had been issued for Jake Morrissey and 2 other men matching the description Katherine had provided. "Thornhill will try to distance himself from his hired guns," Thomas explained over dinner one evening. "He will claim he never ordered any violence, that Morrissey was acting on his own initiative. But if we can get Morrissey to testify against him, or find any paper trail linking Thornhill to the men who shot you, we might be able to bring criminal charges, not just civil penalties." "That is a big if," Katherine said. "Men like Morrissey are loyal to whoever pays them. He is not going to turn on Thornhill easily. No, but he might if he is looking at a hanging for attempted murder, Connor pointed out. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. As Katherine healed physically, she and Connor grew closer emotionally. They spent hours together each day, riding the ranch boundaries to check fences, helping with various tasks around the property, and simply talking. Connor told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, of breeding horses as well as cattle, of building something permanent and worthwhile. Katherine shared her plans for her father's ranch, the improvements she wanted to make, the legacy she hoped to create. They discovered they had similar values and complementary skills. Connor was strong and practical, good with his hands and comfortable with hard physical labor. Katherine was organized and forward-thinking, with a head for numbers and an understanding of the business side of ranching that came from years of helping her father with accounts and planning. Together, they realized they could build something remarkable, but there was more than just practical compatibility growing between them. There were moments of tension, of awareness, of something electric in the air when they stood close together or their hands accidentally touched. Connor found himself noticing everything about Katherine, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking hard, the way her eyes lit up when she was excited about something, the musical sound of her laugh when something genuinely amused her. Katherine was equally aware of Connor. She noticed the way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the gentleness in his strong hands when he helped her over rough ground, the protective way he positioned himself between her and any potential danger. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing when they were apart, anticipating their next conversation or shared activity with an eagerness that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with genuine affection. 3 weeks after Katherine's arrival at the Westbrook Ranch, Thomas received a message from the county sheriff. Jake Morrissey had been arrested trying to cross the border into Mexico. Faced with the very real possibility of hanging, Morrissey had agreed to testify against Marcus Thornhill in exchange for a reduced sentence. The testimony he was prepared to give was damning. Thornhill had not only ordered the ambush on Katherine, but had been involved in several other incidents of intimidation and violence against small ranchers who refused to sell their land. "This changes everything," Thomas said, gathering everyone in his study to discuss the news. "With Morrissey's testimony added to yours, Katherine, the case against Thornhill is solid. The judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor on the civil case, and the criminal charges might actually stick this time." "When is the trial?" Katherine asked. 4 days from now. The judge wants to move quickly before Thornhill has a chance to interfere with witnesses or evidence. Thomas looked at Katherine seriously. "You are going to need to go back to Santa Barbara. Are you up for that?" Katherine straightened in her chair, her hand unconsciously going to her side, where the wound was now nothing more than a tender spot and a healing scar. "I am ready. I have been ready. This is what I have been waiting for." "Then we will go together," Connor said immediately. "I am not letting you face Thornhill alone." "I will send some of my men with you as well," Thomas added. "Thornhill is not going to take this lying down. Even with Morrissey in custody, he still has other men on his payroll, and he is going to be desperate. Desperate men do stupid things." The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Katherine practiced her testimony with Thomas, making sure she could clearly and calmly relate everything that had happened. Connor coordinated with the Westbrook Ranch hands who would be accompanying them, planning routes and contingencies in case they encountered trouble on the road. Sarah insisted on making sure Katherine had proper clothes for the trial, altering one of her own dresses to fit Katherine's slighter frame. On the evening before they were set to leave, Katherine found herself standing on the front porch of the Westbrook house, looking out at the sunset, painting the hills in shades of gold and purple. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Connor. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "A little," Katherine admitted. "Not about the testimony itself. I know what I need to say, and I know it is the truth, but I keep thinking about what happens after. If we win, if Thornhill is actually brought to justice, then I can finally go home to my father's ranch. I can start rebuilding, start living the life I planned before all this happened." "That is a good thing, is it not?" Connor asked, though there was something careful in his voice. Katherine turned to look at him, at this man who had saved her life and become so much more to her than just a protector. "It is a good thing, but it also means leaving here, leaving the Westbrooks and leaving you." She paused, gathering her courage. "Unless you wanted to come with me." Connor's eyes widened slightly. "Katherine." "I know it is presumptuous," Katherine said quickly. "I know we have not known each other very long, and I know the circumstances have been unusual, to say the least. But Connor, these past weeks with you have shown me something important. I am stronger with you than I am alone. We work well together. We think alike. We want the same things. And more than that, she took a deep breath. I have fallen in love with you. Completely, impossibly, inconveniently in love with you. And I know that if I go back to my ranch alone, I will spend the rest of my life regretting not telling you how I feel." For a moment, Connor just stared at her, and Katherine felt her heart sink. She had misread the situation. He cared about her, certainly, but not in the way she had hoped. She had just made a terrible fool of herself. But then Connor was moving, closing the distance between them, and his hands were framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Katherine Foster," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been in love with you since the moment I caught you falling outside that inn. I just did not have the courage to say it, because I was afraid of what you might say, afraid that you might think I was taking advantage of your situation, afraid that you could not possibly feel the same way about a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a saddle." "Then you are an idiot," Katherine said, tears streaming down her face even as she smiled. "Because I do not care about what you have or do not have. I care about who you are. You are brave and kind and honorable, and you make me want to be braver too. You make me believe that we can face anything as long as we face it together." Connor kissed her then, and it was like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, and Katherine felt like every nerve in her body was alive, like she was finally, completely awake after years of sleepwalking through her life. She kissed him back with all the passion and longing she had been keeping carefully locked away, pouring everything she felt into that one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Connor rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face like she was something precious and fragile. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes?" Katherine asked, slightly dazed. "Yes, I will come with you to your ranch. Yes, I will help you rebuild. Yes, I will stand beside you and face whatever comes next. Yes to everything, Katherine. Always yes." Katherine laughed through her tears and kissed him again, and in that moment, despite everything they still had to face, despite the trial and the danger and the uncertainty of the future, she felt absolutely certain that everything was going to be all right. They rode into Santa Barbara 4 days later, with an escort of 6 Westbrook Ranch hands, arriving just as the courthouse was opening for the day's proceedings. The town was buzzing with news of Morrissey's arrest and his agreement to testify against Thornhill. Katherine could see people whispering and pointing as their group rode down the main street, and she held her head high, refusing to be intimidated. The courthouse was packed. It seemed like half the county had turned out to see the trial of Marcus Thornhill, the powerful land baron who had seemed untouchable for so long. Katherine spotted Thornhill sitting at the defendant's table with his expensive lawyers, and when he saw her, his face went purple with rage. She met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away, and after a moment, he was the one who looked down. The trial lasted 3 days. Katherine gave her testimony calmly and clearly, describing the harassment her father had faced, the escalating threats after his death, and finally the ambush on the road from the courthouse. Connor sat in the front row the entire time, his presence giving her strength whenever she faltered. Jake Morrissey's testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Thornhill had hired him and 2 other men to take care of the Foster woman permanently, providing them with descriptions of Katherine and information about her likely route back from her previous court appearance. He described how they had set up the ambush and how Thornhill had promised them a substantial bonus if they made sure Katherine never made it back to testify. Thornhill's lawyers tried to discredit Morrissey, suggesting he was lying to save himself from the hangman's noose. But the prosecution had other evidence as well. Ledgers showing payments from Thornhill to Morrissey that corresponded with dates of various acts of violence against small ranchers, testimony from other victims of Thornhill's intimidation tactics, and most damningly, a letter in Thornhill's own handwriting to Morrissey discussing the Foster problem and the need to resolve it permanently before it gets to the judge. On the 3rd day, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and illegal seizure of property. Marcus Thornhill was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and the judge ordered all property he had illegally seized, including cattle and equipment taken from the Foster Ranch, to be returned to its rightful owners. Katherine walked out of the courthouse with Connor's arm around her shoulders, feeling like a massive weight had been lifted from her chest. It was over. She had won. Her father's legacy was safe, and the man who had tried to destroy her was going to pay for his crimes. But more than that, she had found something she had not even known she was looking for. She had found a partner, a love, a future that was brighter than anything she could have imagined when she had stumbled bleeding into Ventura that night, weeks ago. They rode back to the Foster Ranch together, and Katherine felt tears prick her eyes when she saw her father's land spread out before her. The house needed work. Thornhill's men had broken windows and damaged doors during their occupation. The fences needed repair, and the barn could use a fresh coat of paint. But it was still standing, still beautiful in its way, still home. "It is going to take a lot of work to get this place back to what it was," Connor said, surveying the damage. "Then it is a good thing I have help," Katherine said, taking his hand. "Connor, I meant what I said. I want you here, not just to help with the work, but as a true partner. I want us to build this ranch together, make it into something my father would be proud of, make it into our home." Connor turned to her, his sage green eyes serious. "Katherine Foster, are you asking me to marry you?" Katherine felt her cheeks flush but did not look away. "I suppose I am. Is that too forward? Too unconventional? Should I have waited for you to ask me?" "Forward and unconventional describes you perfectly," Connor said with a smile. "And those are two of the many reasons I love you. So, yes, Katherine, yes, I will marry you. I will build a life with you here. I will help you make this ranch into everything you dreamed it could be. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a drifter who had nothing to offer but his heart." "Your heart is everything," Katherine said, and kissed him there in the overgrown yard of her father's ranch, with the California sun warm on their faces and their whole future stretching out before them, like an unwritten story full of possibility. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Westbrook Ranch, with Thomas and Sarah standing as witnesses, and most of Ventura turning out to celebrate. Katherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Sarah had helped her make, and Connor wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer from the assembled guests could probably be heard all the way to Santa Barbara. The first year of their marriage was hard work but full of joy. They threw themselves into rebuilding the ranch, repairing buildings, replacing stolen cattle, and slowly bringing the land back to productivity. Connor proved to be as skilled at ranch management as Katherine had hoped, and together they made improvements her father had never had the resources to attempt. They built a new barn, dug a better irrigation system, and began breeding horses as well as cattle. The work was exhausting, but they were happy. Katherine had never imagined that marriage could be like this, a true partnership where both people contributed equally and respected each other's strengths. Connor never tried to take over or make decisions without consulting her, and Katherine made sure to value his input and experience. They disagreed sometimes, certainly, but they had learned to talk through their differences rather than letting resentment build. And at night, when the work was done and they lay together in the bedroom that had once been her father's, Katherine would think about how close she had come to losing everything, how she might have died on the street in Ventura if not for Connor's intervention, how she might have given up and let Thornhill win if not for Connor's stubborn insistence that fighting was worth it, how she might have spent her whole life alone, never knowing the profound joy of being loved completely and loving completely in return. "What are you thinking about?" Connor asked one night, pulling her close against his chest. "About how lucky I am," Katherine said. "About how everything terrible that happened led to something wonderful. About how I would not change a single moment, even the painful ones, because they brought me to you." "I was thinking something similar," Connor admitted. "I spent 3 years after Mary died thinking that happiness was something that happened to other people, that I had used up my share and would spend the rest of my life just going through the motions. And then you stumbled into my life, bleeding and stubborn and braver than anyone I had ever met. And suddenly I had a reason to live again. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Katherine." She turned in his arms to face him, running her fingers through his hair. "Then I suppose we are even. though I reserve the right to claim I saved you more if we ever argue about it." Connor laughed, that deep, warm sound she had come to love. "Fair enough. Though I think the real winner in this situation is me, because I get to spend the rest of my life with you." "Flatterer," Katherine accused, but she was smiling. "Truth-teller," Connor corrected, and kissed her until she forgot whatever witty response she had been about to make. 2 years after their marriage, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy they named Samuel after her father. Connor was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, holding his son like he might break and staring at the tiny, perfect face with an expression of absolute wonder. "We made this," he kept saying over and over. "We actually made a person." "I did most of the work," Katherine pointed out from the bed, exhausted but happy. "You did all the work," Connor corrected, kissing her forehead. "You are amazing. He is amazing. I cannot believe how lucky I am." Little Samuel grew strong and healthy, and 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Sarah, after Sarah Westbrook, who had become like a mother to Katherine. The Westbrooks were frequent visitors to the Foster Ranch, and Thomas and Connor became business partners in several ventures, including a horse breeding program that became famous throughout California for producing exceptional stock. Katherine's ranch prospered beyond anything her father could have imagined. She and Connor expanded the property, buying adjacent land from neighbors who were ready to retire. They hired good workers and treated them fairly, earning loyalty and respect. They became known throughout the county as honest dealers who stood by their word and who would help neighbors in need without expecting anything in return. Marcus Thornhill died in prison after serving 8 years of his sentence, and Katherine felt nothing but a distant sadness that he had wasted his life on greed and cruelty. She and Connor attended his funeral, not to gloat, but to pay respects to the man's estranged daughter, who had reached out to Katherine with tearful apologies for her father's actions. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses. Sarah was bright and fearless, always getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble. 2 more children followed, another boy named Thomas and a girl named Mary after Connor's lost sister. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Connor and Katherine stood together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over land they had built together. Samuel was in the barn with the horses. Sarah was playing with her younger siblings in the yard, and everything was golden in the evening light. "Do you ever regret it?" Connor asked quietly. "The way we came together? All the pain and danger?" Katherine leaned into his side, his arm coming automatically around her shoulders. "Not for a single second. Every hard thing we went through made us stronger. Every challenge we faced together taught us how to trust each other more deeply. If I could go back and change it, have us meet in some normal way without all the drama and danger, I would not do it. Because this is our story, Connor. The innkeeper turned me away, bleeding and desperate, and you carried me to your room and tended me yourself. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved, and in doing so, you showed me what real love looks like. How could I ever regret that?" "When you put it that way," Connor said, smiling down at her, "I suppose you are right, though I am still sorry you got shot." "I am sorry I got shot too," Katherine laughed. "That part was not great, but everything that came after building this life with you, having our children, creating something lasting and good that has been better than anything I ever dreamed possible." Connor kissed her temple, then her cheek, then her lips. "Here is to the next 10 years, he said, "and the 10 after that, and all the years beyond. I love you, Katherine Reeves." "I love you too," Katherine replied, "always and forever." They stood there together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children laughed and played. Around them, their ranch hummed with quiet life. And in that moment, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude for the strange and wonderful path that had led her to this place, to this man, to this life. She had been shot, abandoned, and nearly left to die on a dusty street in a town where no one knew her name. But Connor Reeves had refused to walk away. He had carried her to safety, tended her wounds, and stood beside her through every trial that followed. He had given her not just his help, but his heart, and in return, she had given him hers. Together, they had built something remarkable. Not just a successful ranch, though they had certainly done that. But more importantly, They had built a family, a home, a love that would endure through whatever challenges the future might bring. They had proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best ones, if we are brave enough to face them and lucky enough to find someone to face them with. As they walked back into their house together, hands intertwined, Katherine thought about the frightened, bleeding woman who had stumbled into Ventura 10 years ago. That woman had been strong, certainly, but she had also been alone, carrying the weight of her troubles with no one to share the burden. She had fought hard and refused to give up, but she had not known what it was like to have a true partner, someone who would stand with her through anything. Now, Katherine knew. She knew what it meant to be loved completely, without reservation or conditions. She knew what it felt like to trust someone with her whole heart and never be disappointed. She knew the profound joy of building a life with someone who shared her values, her dreams, her determination to make the world a little bit better than they found it. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, though Connor and Katherine edited out some of the more frightening details until they were older. They heard about the brave woman who testified against corruption even after being shot, and about the cowboy who refused to turn away someone in need. They heard about how love can bloom even in the hardest circumstances, and about how choosing courage over fear can change the course of your entire life. Samuel grew up to be a veterinarian, using his love of animals and his steady hands to help ranchers throughout California care for their herds. Sarah became a teacher, fierce and passionate about education, particularly for girls who were told they should not aspire to more than marriage and children. Thomas took over the ranch when Connor and Katherine eventually retired, running it with the same integrity and vision his parents had shown. And Mary became a lawyer, dedicating herself to helping small ranchers and farmers fight against the kind of corruption and land grabbing that had nearly destroyed her mother. Connor and Katherine lived long lives, growing old together with grace and continued devotion. They never took each other for granted, never let the passion and partnership that defined their relationship fade into comfortable indifference. They kept falling in love with each other, over and over, finding new reasons to admire and appreciate the person they had chosen to walk through life beside. When Katherine was 72 and Connor was 75, they took a trip back to Ventura, wanting to see the place where their story had begun. The boarding house where Connor had rented a room was gone now, replaced by a newer, larger hotel. The Golden Rose Inn was still there, but under new management. The town had grown considerably, with more businesses and more people than Katherine remembered from that desperate night so many years ago. They walked the streets together, Connor's arm supporting Katherine, not because she was wounded now, but simply because age had made them both slower and more careful. They found the spot where Katherine had collapsed, where Connor had caught her, and they stood there quietly for a moment, remembering. "Thank you," Katherine said quietly, "for being exactly where I needed you to be, exactly when I needed you most." "Thank you for letting me help you," Connor replied, "for trusting me when you had no reason to, for loving me when I thought I was too broken to be loved, for giving me a life more wonderful than I ever imagined possible." They kissed there on the street in Ventura, two old people who had loved each other for more than 50 years, who had built a family and a legacy together, who had proved that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. And when they finally made their way back to their hotel, walking slowly but contentedly in the California sunshine, they were holding hands just as they had on their wedding day, just as they would continue to do for all the days they had left together. Their story became part of the folklore of the region, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. The tale of the woman who was turned away bleeding and the cowboy who saved her life, who fought together against corruption, who built something lasting and good out of pain and hardship, and refused to let injustice win. It was a story about courage and kindness, about the power of standing up for what is right even when the cost is high, about the transformative nature of true love. But for Connor and Katherine, it was never a legend or a story. It was simply their life, lived fully and honestly, with all the mess and beauty and hard work and joy that comes from choosing each other every single day without fail or regret. They died within 6 months of each other, Katherine first, and then Connor, who said he could not imagine a world without her in it, and quietly let himself follow where she had gone. They were buried on their ranch, on a hill overlooking the land they had loved and nurtured for more than 5 decades, under a large oak tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. Their children and great-grandchildren gathered for the funeral. Dozens of people whose lives existed because two people had found each other on a desperate night in 1878 and refused to let go. They told stories and shared memories, laughed and cried, and celebrated lives well lived and love that had never wavered. And on the gravestone, beneath their names and the years of their births and deaths, was carved a simple phrase that summed up everything they had been to each other. She needed help. He gave it freely. Together, they built a world. In the end, that was the truth of Connor and Katherine Reeves. They had started with nothing but need and compassion, and from that foundation, they had built a love story that would inspire generations. They had proved that heroism is not about grand gestures or dramatic moments, but about choosing kindness when it would be easier to walk away, about standing beside someone through their darkest hours, about building something good and lasting through hard work and unwavering commitment. The ranch they built still operates today, run by their descendants who carry on the traditions of fairness, integrity, and community that Connor and Katherine established. The land is green and prosperous, the cattle healthy, the horses among the finest in California. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets in shades of gold and purple over the coastal hills, people swear they can see two figures standing on the porch of the old ranch house, hand in hand, looking out over everything they created together. It is probably just a trick of the light, of course. But then again, maybe some loves are too strong to be contained by something as simple as death. Maybe some partnerships endure beyond the boundaries of mortality. Maybe Connor and Katherine Reeves are still there, still together, still building and dreaming and loving as they did in life. And maybe that is the real happy ending, not just living and loving well while alive, but creating something so strong, so true, so beautiful that it transcends the temporary nature of human existence and becomes something permanent and eternal. That is the legacy of the innkeeper who turned her away bleeding, and the cowboy who carried her to his room and tended her himself. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, or even a love story that became legend, but proof that one act of kindness, one moment of choosing compassion over convenience, can change the world in ways both large and small, rippling out through time and space and generations, touching lives not yet lived and creating possibilities not yet imagined. And in a world that so often seems dark and cruel and indifferent, that is a legacy worth celebrating, worth remembering, worth aspiring to create in our own lives. Because if Connor and Katherine could find love and hope and happiness in the midst of violence and injustice and loss, then perhaps the rest of us can too. Perhaps we all carry within us the capacity to be the person who does not turn away, who reaches out to help, who chooses courage and compassion even when fear and self-preservation seem like safer options. That is the gift their story gives us. The lesson that echoes down through the decades from that dusty evening in Ventura, California in 1878, when two souls found each other in the darkness and chose to walk toward the light together. The gift of knowing that we are never as powerless as we think, that love is always possible, that kindness matters, that standing up for what is right is worth whatever it costs, and that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected moments. Connor and Katherine Reeves lived that truth every day of their long lives together, and in doing so, they left behind not just descendants and property and stories, but a blueprint for how to live with integrity and love and purpose. They showed that real strength is not about dominating others, but about lifting them up. That real courage is not about never being afraid, but about acting despite fear. That real love is not about grand romantic gestures, but about showing up, day after day, and choosing your partner over and over again. Their story is finished now, their lives complete, their love story told. But the impact of what they built together continues, spreading out in ever-widening circles through their family, their community, and everyone who hears their tale and feels inspired to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to help someone in need. And that, ultimately, is the happiest ending of all. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. Not an ending, but a new beginning for everyone touched by their example. The innkeeper turned her away bleeding, and the cowboy carried her to his room and tended her himself. And from that simple act of human decency bloomed a love that changed the world, one heart at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of connection and compassion at a time. That is their legacy. That is their gift to us all. And that is why their story will never truly end. As long as there are people who believe that love is possible, that kindness matters, and that we all have the power to be someone's hero, if only we have the courage to try.